Hello and welcome to healthyhouseplants.com, where we teach you all about gardening in the great indoors. If you'd like to support our show, please use our Amazon affiliate link below. Today I'm going to talk to you about growing ferns indoors. A little bit tricky to grow ferns indoors because of some of their requirements. So we're going to talk about that, how to keep them as healthy and happy in your indoor garden as possible. Okay, so ferns are some of the oldest plants in the world. They've been thriving for at least 300 million years, and they have thrived in many different environments. So there is no reason why you can't successfully grow them in your indoor garden. However, there are some things to keep in mind, as I mentioned. So one of those, the biggie, is humidity. It's essential to good fern growth. So if you are living in a dry climate, you are working against your climate for your plant, okay? So if you've been trying to grow maidenhair fern, this beauty here, and you're having difficulties, I do have a video on that. However, if you live in a really dry climate, what you're going to want to do is grow in a terrarium. I have a playlist on a terrarium series and how to choose the terrariums and the plants and potting them up. So you would want to get a bigger terrarium, such as a Wardian case, which is a bigger, it looks like a mini greenhouse. I'll put a link below for some of those. So something that's going to fit your plant. So say like this beauty, the maidenhair fern, will do well in that situation. I want to show you here a spike moss. It's called spike moss, but it is a fern, and you can see how nicely this guy is growing in this indoor in terms of terrarium environment. It just is really thriving. And I have some other plants that I got at the same time, and because they're in the dry air, they're much smaller right now. But this one is just so happy to be in this indoor environment, this humid indoor. Basically, you're creating another indoor within your indoor environment. It's a little fairy garden terrarium. In my series, you get to see this one potted up, and you'll also see when I planted it how much smaller that fern was. So as you're seeing also too, it's very humid in there. It's very moist in there. They just thrive with that. So if you really want to grow the ferns indoors, you need to get the humidity up as much as possible. I have a video on various ways also to get the humidity up. One of the ways is with a humidity tray. So for instance, down here I have marbles down there, and you put water underneath that. That will give, as the water evaporates, will give a little bit of humidity to the plant. Not a ton, but a little bit. And then also making sure to keep your ferns moist but not soggy, but you don't ever want to let them dry out. When you water, that also humidifies them somewhat as well. Another thing that will keep things humid is to put them in a humid part of the house. So the bathroom, where it does get humid for a while and then it's not, as long as you have good lighting in there, and I'm going to talk about lighting in a minute. Another thing you can do for your ferns to keep the humidity up some too is to mist them. So you want to use something that has a fine mist and mist them on a regular basis as well. Misting doesn't do all that much though. It will raise the humidity for a little bit of time, and then it goes back down again. So you'll probably notice I'm talking about a lot of different ways to keep them humidified besides putting them in a terrarium. If you put them in a terrarium, you won't need to do any of these other things. But if you aren't going to put them in a terrarium, so you would want to mist, you would want to use the moisture tray, and some people use humidifiers. If you're using a humidifier in your house for some other reason, then they would the ferns will thrive near a humidifier. I'm not saying to go out and do that, but if for some reason you decide you wanted to use a humidifier, they also would like that as well. Okay, the big thing, actually, one of the most effective things for increasing humidity besides a terrarium is to have a lot of houseplants because the more houseplants you have, the more humid the air will be. The reason for that is houseplants, all houseplants, including ferns, transpire. We perspire, they transpire. When they transpire, they let out moisture, which humidifies the surrounding air. So all your houseplants will be humidifying each other. You'll have a nice big party with all the plants saying, hey, let's go humidify each other, and they will, and that will help them really a lot to keep up the humidity in their air and to help them thrive. Now, a really great tool, and I do have a video on using that, using this, is a hygrometer, and this tells you relative humidity, and by relative humidity, it's relative to the temperature in the room. So this, as you can see, shows Fahrenheit, and it also shows humidity. The Fahrenheit temperature is on top, the humidity is on the bottom. So right now I have 53%. A minute ago it was at 50 as I had it further away. So the closer I get to the plants, the higher this thing comes up. The more I group my ferns, the higher I'm going to get because they are actively transpiring 24/7 for you. Great thing about that too is that they are also humidifying the air for you and cleaning your indoor air. Now I'm up to 57. See, so that shows you these guys work pretty quickly. You do need to give them a few seconds here and there, but they do work pretty quickly to check your humidity. And I would suggest using them when you're growing ferns. And if you're having trouble growing ferns, so if, for instance, you're getting a lot of drying leaves and you're getting leaf loss and the plant just doesn't seem to be growing much and it doesn't look happy, if you are watering and keeping the soil moist, then you very well may have a low humidity issue, and you want to try to solve that issue as soon as possible. So besides those worrying cases, you can also put your ferns into the standard aquarium, the small aquarium, and put a lid on it, a lid that has a little holes for some air circulation, but not a lot. This guy has holes, looks 2 holes that lets in some air, but for the most part, as you can see, it's very moist in there. So once you get that humidity under control, you will have really good luck with your ferns. This is another lovely beauty here. So this one is a fern with a little bit bigger leaf, as you can see, but it's also is a fern and likes the same conditions. Now, I mentioned lighting, so they do need ample light. A lot of times that's a little surprising, right? Because a lot of times if you're walking through a forest, say, you may see ferns on the ground and they seem to be in pretty low light. But indoors, they do need a good light. Medium light works really well. Medium to bright, you wouldn't want too bright of a light. If you get too bright of a light, you can get burn on the leaves, especially the tender leaves of the maidenhair, and on thicker leaved ones, you're going to get spotting, brown spotting, and it also turns black, and that's a sign of leaf burn, so too much light. And yellowing leaves can be too much light if you're doing everything else correctly. So some good places, so if you east-facing windows, perfect. They get that beautiful morning sunlight. A north facing, depending on how it's situated, can also work. I have north facing, northwest facing, and so in that area that's closer to the west, you get that combination of the low and the high light. They also love full spectrum lighting. This one has been growing under full spectrum lighting and it absolutely loves it, and this guy is near full spectrum lighting as well, so they thrive in that full spectrum lighting. As I always mention, it's very easy to find full spectrum light bulbs, full spectrum fixtures for your For your indoor garden, full spectrum simulates daylight, so that's why it's so important to use the right lighting, which would be full spectrum lighting, not just any old light bulb, but you can get full spectrum lighting in light bulbs that can be put into all of your fixtures. So if you have a lamp nearby, you can put it in the lamp and put the plant underneath the lighting. You want it as underneath as possible of the lighting to get really good light. Okay, so feeding your ferns. They love decaying organic matter. They love humic acid. And what humic acid is, and I do have a video on this as well, but it is decaying plant matter. So remembering they're on the forest floor, what they get fed with is humic acid, with decaying leaves and branches and things like that coming from other plants. So I would suggest using a fertilizer that has some humic acid in it and is organic. Very important, organic. It's very easy to burn ferns with a chemical fertilizer, so always go organic. I do have a fertilizer product. It's my Green Gourmet Houseplant Food. Actually has humic acid in it and a lot of other really great nutrients, and it is organic and nice and gentle, and the ferns absolutely love it. So feeding, in terms of how often, you want to feed every 2 to 4 months. They're not extremely heavy feeders, but because they are from the jungle floor where they're continuously taking in low sources of nutrients, so every, like I mentioned, 2 to 4 months will work just fine for them. And don't fertilize in the winter months, so resume fertilizing in late winter, early spring, and stop fertilizing at the end of October-ish or so. Okay, so if you've got them well fed and you've got them happily under the right lighting and humidity, you want to, as mentioned already, but I will go into a little bit more detail now, in terms of watering, you want to keep the soil moist but not soggy, okay? So you don't want them swimming, but you do want to keep them moist. You don't want to ever let them dry out. You let them dry out, they're going to lose leaves and they may not make it. So on the moisture meter, you definitely want to, moisture meters, you want to, when they are about 5, 4 being the lowest, which is still moist but not dry. So if you see, I put this in, this guy's this guy is at, looks like 6. So in that middle area, when you've watered, that's where you want to be, but I will wait until about 4, in between 4 and 5, to water again. Pick up the plant if it's a lot lighter. Also, if you stick your finger in the first ½ inch or so of soil and it's dry, it's time to water. Maidenhair ferns being an exception. Once that very top of the soil starts to look a little bit dry, you want to water these guys, and they also will be a little bit more lightweight. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Always water your ferns and all houseplants with warm to tepid water. The temperature does matter. I have a video on that as well. So you don't want to have cold water on them. They have very tender roots, and when those roots are hit by very cold water, even just cold water, they will die back. You set your plant up for root rot, and also some spotting, and just a slowdown in growth and even shock. So warm to tepid water for your ferns indoors. As far as pests, you may see some mealybugs occasionally, so keep an eye out for them. There's little buggers or little white cottony pests that are a pain. Treat for them, get them out of the way, because you definitely don't want that proliferating. They do like it humid, so that's why they come for your ferns. And temperature wise, okay, so you do want your ferns in on the cooler side, away from drafts. So but you don't want to go too low, right? So, okay, so you would want, so a good range would be between 60 and 80 degrees, but airing more like 60 to 75 would be perfect. A lot of homes are kept around that during most of the year, so that works. If you find that it's in too cold of an area or too warm of an area, then try moving it around, and using your handy hygrometer you will be able to tell if the temperature is good and if the humidity level is good at the same time. So that is it for growing ferns indoors. Please feel free to ask any questions below. I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you for stopping by today. Please leave any comments about any indoor gardening tutorials you'd like to see. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And please check the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos are released.